The 2023 Jacksonville shooting, the aftermath, and the weak response from the Florida governor. After a murderous white supremacist went on a shooting rampage killing 3 Black Americans, the governor of Florida could not bring himself to say any words describing the then-known facts about the shooter, like white supremacist, racist, neo-Nazi, mass murderer, mass shooter, or previously mentally disabled. As the governor got booed in Jacksonville, he could do nothing more than offer empty condolences and anemic amounts of money earmarked for security. The governor gave a very short video statement on the evening of the shooting, Saturday, August 26, and then attended and spoke at a vigil for the victims on Sunday, August 27. At his video statement he said, "This shooting, based on the manifesto they discovered from the scumbag that did this, was racially motivated. He was targeting people based on their race. That is totally unacceptable." He said the shooting was a cowardly act. He then added, "This guy killed himself rather than face the music and accept responsibility for his actions." Further, the Florida governor said, "He took the coward's way out." And the governor finished with, "We condemn what happened in the strongest possible terms," he added. "We've offered support for Sheriff Waters and the city of Jacksonville. And we send our condolences to the victims and their families, who were the victims of a very cowardly act." Later, at a vigil for the victims in Jacksonville, he said, "We won't let anyone target another person based on their race, and we won't let any scumbag target our HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities." The governor quickly moved on to talk about his resolve to provide funds for security to the city and the nearby HBCU, Edward Waters University. This is, even though the shooting did not occur at the school, and security there was apparently quite effective at preventing a shooting. Here, we will analyze his few and cautious words, and find out his real thoughts and feelings on the matter, and the real level of concern he has for killers such as the Jacksonville shooter, and the mass shooting itself. And we'll find out the level of concern he holds for the victims of this heinous mass murder, the Black community. First, here is the basic background on this terrible event. The gunman was clearly motivated by racist and white supremacist views. The gunman's left behind manifesto and messages, and his actions demonstrate this clearly. On Saturday, August 26, around 1 p.m., the gunman appears to target a majority Black area of Jacksonville, specifically, Edward Waters University. At the school's parking lot, he was witnessed gearing up with what appeared to be a tactical vest, mask, and gloves. He then drove away from the school's parking lot when school security confronted him. The gunman then drove off and headed to a nearby thrift store. Once there, he began shooting at people in the parking lot and inside of the store around 1:08 p.m. The gunman ultimately killed 3 people, then shot and killed himself just prior to police arrival. I'd like to begin my commentary with what I believe caused this, yet another, mass shooting. First, the level of vitriol for Black America, in the rhetoric by the media and political celebrities, is at an all-time high. The bubbling racism in American society is getting harder and harder to disguise. The prevailing false narratives that consistently paint efforts for Black equality as an overt attacks on white Americans are reaching a growing audience. Especially since the George Floyd protests in 2020. I believe white replacement theories and false and exaggerated white grievances are more widespread today than at the height of the Jim Crow era. And lingering perceptions of Black criminality, leftism, and perceptions of Blacks wanting too much seem to be spreading fast too. The concerted attacks on woke from so-called conservatives focus squarely on Black Americans, but also on immigrants and the LGBTQIA community. Attacks on Black culture, history, and empirical truth seem to be widespread as well. Secondly, the horrific number of guns, especially mass casualty guns which are mostly in the hands of so-called conservatives, is a tremendous problem. Inevitably, this flood of guns have bled over to the extremist so-called conservatives of the nation, which is established as the most clear and present danger to peace, safety, and security in the U.S. Thirdly, the governor of Florida falls right in line with the mentality and ideologies of these far right-wing groups. It is no coincidence he has the support of extremist groups like neo-Nazis, neo-Confederates, and the KKK. And he has consistently and loudly supported many of their most dear wishes. He has maintained loose gun laws in Florida, which mostly keep guns in the hands of groups and individuals that are indifferent of blacks or that are anti-black. He has sown hatred towards all that is woke, which centers on blackness, which can be traced directly to demands for equality and movements to stop the police violence toward blacks, including the George Floyd protests. And he has relentlessly pushed for the downplaying, revising, and banning of the true American history that must include the many atrocities perpetrated by white America. The governor has also made it clear he does not want immigrants from brown or black countries, legal or not. He has stated it, implied it, and acted upon it. He has bussed out refugees from Latin America and the Caribbean, while welcoming white Ukrainian and Cuban refugees in large numbers. The governor has attacked black and black-supporting school superintendents across Florida. And, most importantly, the governor has taken zero actions to fight discrimination and racism. In fact, his efforts have been in the opposite. He's fighting against inclusion and racial equality programs all across the state. In the initial press release, the governor said, this shooting, based on the manifesto they discovered from the scumbag that did this, was racially motivated. First, he bases the racial motivation of the killing on the manifesto, and not in the clearly racist and targeted actions taken specifically against blacks. This implies not having a firm belief on an anti-black racist motive, and it allows for doubt to later be embraced by many of his supporters. By calling the mass murder a mere shooting, he's downplaying the situation. A shooting may or may not involve casualties. A hunter of wild game does a shooting, an armed robber may do a shooting, and police routinely do shootings. The word shooting also implies the aimless letting off of rounds into the air, and is far from a racially targeted killing. Notice also how he chose the sanitized words scumbag and coward to describe the murderous shooter and his actions. A more enraged and impacted governor could have included the simpler and more direct terms like racist shooting, or white supremacist shooting to describe the act, or racist, neo-Nazi, or white supremacist shooter to describe the perpetrator. This choice of words tells me that he is not wanting to go too far in denouncing the murder and the murderer. This is because, I believe, a large number of his supporting base are cautiously indifferent, some even quietly supportive, of the mentality and actions taken by the shooter, and he does not want to step on their toes. Furthermore, I believe he lacks the empathy toward and the connection with the black community. The governor added, he was targeting people based on their race. That is totally unacceptable. This statement says a lot about the governor, his mentality, and his agenda. Again, it lacks empathy and impact. He said the killer targeted people. You target a dartboard, you target a basketball hoop. You don't call targeting when you shoot and kill people. This word is an attempt to veer away from words like massacred or killed, which more accurately describe what happened. In the face of a horrific mass murder, he is taking the opportunity to paint himself as a protector of all races and implying that attacks to any race is unacceptable. He, in fact, bases many of his attacks on what he calls woke as attacks based on race, and as attempts at shaming white Americans for the past atrocities their ancestors committed, like black slavery and the attempted Native American genocide. This statement was carefully crafted by him, or his speechwriter, to be multi-use to support his arguments, in supporting protection of any race, white America included. But, I suspect, if his trend of actions continues as before, his so-called support for black America won't go further than his words. He also called this incredibly heinous carnage merely unacceptable. I could not find a more effective word to downplay a horrific event. Bad school grades are unacceptable, low work performance is unacceptable. A targeted mass shooting by a racist terrorist is obviously more than unacceptable. I believe this choice of words is calculated, again, to avoid appearing even mildly aggressive against racist attacks. And to avoid to appear to soften up on his war against wokeism. The governor also said the shooting was a cowardly act. If so, I have a question to pose to him. What would it take for the murderous racist to have done the shooting in a valiant way? To call this mass murder cowardly is dismissing the act as being lacking honor or bravery. It doesn't fully condemn the act as being intolerable, unbearable, and to be opposed with the most severe of consequences. The word cowardly condemns the method and behavior carried by the shooter during the shooting, such as overpowering unarmed people at a store and taking his own life shortly after. Cowardly act does not refer to the shooting itself. Again, words like horrific, heinous, savage, and barbaric would have served immeasurably better, given the situation. But, again, the governor seems to be treading carefully, I believe because his true feelings and the feelings of his base take precedence over those of the black community or the families who were impacted by this mass murder. I wonder if the shooter would have been killed in a blazing gunfight with police. Would the governor have called the shooting cowardly? I believe not, as evident in his next statement. This guy killed himself rather than face the music and accept responsibility for his actions. He spent more words on the way the shooter conducted the shooting than on the heinous act, or the trauma such killing had on the victims, family, and the community. He seems to be more bothered by the fact that the shooter killed himself than by the fact that the shooter committed mass murder. If anything, the governor should be content with the shooter's final action, since he is a big proponent of the death penalty for criminals. He even boasts about killing immigrants suspected of bringing illegal drugs, extrajudicially, at the Mexican border. So, the shooter applied the kind of justice that the governor supports by killing himself after committing mass murder. So, what consequences is the governor referring to? The killer faced the ultimate consequence. So, again, the governor's central concern seems to circle around the cowardly way in which the killer behaved. The governor finished the video statement with, "We condemn what happened in the strongest possible terms. We've offered support for Sheriff Waters and the city of Jacksonville. And we send our condolences to the victims and their families, who were the victims of a very cowardly act." Condemning what happened veers away from racism, mass shooting, and mass casualty weapons. 3 key subjects the governor wants to censor and not talk about. Again, repeating the mass shooting was a cowardly act downplays the situation and further avoids describing the act of mass shooting. He knows mentioning these words may arouse renewed resistance to the state's loose gun laws. And, by avoiding any talk about the specific racism against Black Americans, the governor is attempting to paint this mass murder as just racially motivated, which implies the targeting of any race, not just blacks. Thus, diluting the specifically anti-black racism central to the shooting, to a mere, "Can't we all just get along?" The governor sent condolences to the victims, the dead victims. I wonder how he's sending those and what do the dead victims need condolences for? I believe this is a pathetic attempt at appearing religious and concerned. I wonder how his so-called beliefs are reconciled with his long history of hateful rhetoric and actions that consistently have hurt the Black community in Florida. For example, he has taken 0 actions to improve the very dire predicament of Black Americans in Florida. In fact, he has gone out of his way to strip power away from Black communities across the state, by diluting their voting power and influence in politics, and by keeping in place the racist paradigms in just about every sector of Floridian society. The governor did not let it be known that Black Americans would be specifically protected from these type of crimes, nor that they are an embraced part of Florida. He lacked genuine empathy and concern throughout, and did not come to the Black community with his head down ready to listen. Here is an excerpt from the then Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, on the aftermath of the Christchurch shootings. Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand, they may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us. The person who has perpetuated this violence against us is not. They have no place in New Zealand. She spoke with grief and conviction, and later decisively acted on her words. Finally, the governor could not help himself from taking the time to bring credit to himself, by boasting about providing funds to the families and the community. However, the funds for the community appear to be specifically for security. This, most likely, means more money for the already bloated and militarized local police departments. And that money is likely to fall in the control of majority white police departments that operate in Black communities to their detriment. And more money to the police historically means more detriment of the black community, as more frivolous fines and incarcerations will likely be the result. At the vigil, the governor began to repeat his rehearsed lines from his initial press release, calling the shooting unacceptable, racially motivated, and targeting race. Again, straying far away from words like racism, mass shooting, and the then-known facts that the shooter was a white supremacist, a neo-Nazi, and had a history of violent and abnormal behavior. Also, he circumnavigated far away from any commitments to fight racism, hate, or even steps to curb mass shootings by addressing the all-too-common excuse of mental health issues. All he did was downplay a horrific killing to an unacceptable act, and double up on his claims of financial commitment for security. When he began to speak, the crowd booed him in continuous interruption, chanting, "Blood is on your hands," and "Black History Matters," until a black city leader interjected and protected the governor. She said, "A bullet don't know no party," and that the governor was there to bring gifts. Again, this reference to bullets further take the blame away from racism and white supremacy, and places it on objects like bullets and guns. And the short-sightedness and the greed of that community leader could not be clearer. When the opportunity came, and was largely missed, to expose the governor on who he really is, and demand that the governor stop his harmful rhetoric and policies against the black Florida community. When discontent began to be voiced, a black leader looking for gifts stopped it. This most recent and pathetic example of betrayal exposes how we, many times, ignore priceless gifts for money. What greater gift on this moment than renewed exposure of the very problems that caused the shooting, and the possible revitalized demands to fix them? But, when the governor was allowed to speak, he was allowed to put a period on the matter, and reducing the solution to more funds. And the underlying problems remained unspoken and unaddressed. Written by Hector Vladimir. August 28 to 29, 2023.